I want you to picture that moment, immediately following a car crash. The noise has stopped. The metal has stopped screeching. You're sitting there. Maybe the airbag dust is settling, and your adrenaline is just, it's spiking so hard you can barely hear. That moment right there is deceptive, because while the collision is over, the event, the physical trauma to the vehicle, it's still unfolding.
That silence is often the most dangerous part.
Hmm.
We tend to view a car accident as a singular point in time. The crash happens, and then, it's done.
And it's not.
Not at all.
Hmm.
From a physics and chemistry standpoint, the crash is just the catalyst. It's the disruption of a high-energy system that is desperately trying to find a new equilibrium.
And that search for equilibrium can get violent and fast.
Hmm.
Today's Deep Dive is all about that escalation. We're looking at the mechanics of vehicle explosions.
Right.
And I don't mean the Hollywood style where a car just taps a guardrail and poof, it vaporizes into a fireball. We're looking at the real engineering failures, the specific chemical reactions, and the survival tactics that actually work. Because looking at the data, the difference between walking away and being caught in a blast radius, it often comes down to decisions made in the first 60 seconds.
It really is a game of seconds. And what stood out to me in the research we pulled for this is how unbelievably complex the modern vehicle is.
Well,
You're strapped inside a machine carrying gallons of combustible fluid.
and high voltage battery packs now.
Potentially high-voltage battery packs, pressurized gases, all of it woven together with miles of electrical wiring.
Yeah.
When you compromise that structure, you create a very, very volatile environment.
It's basically a controlled bomb we all use to get to the grocery store. But let's get specific. I want to move past the general idea of just leaking gas. We know gasoline burns, but liquid gasoline itself isn't actually the explosive element, is it?
No, and that's a huge distinction a lot of people miss. Liquid gasoline is flammable, sure, but it doesn't just explode on its own. It's the vapor. For an explosion to occur, you need a very specific ratio of fuel vapor to oxygen, what engineers call the stoichiometric ratio. In a crash, if a fuel line is severed, you aren't just getting a puddle on the ground. You're spraying fuel under high pressure,
How high are we talking?
often 40 to 60 psi in modern injection systems.
So that atomizes the fuel, it turns it into a fine mist.
Precisely. That mist mixes with the air much, much faster than a standing pool of liquid ever could. So suddenly you have this cloud of vapor surrounding the wreckage. Now you have the fuel and the oxygen perfectly mixed. All you're missing is the activation energy.
The spark. And in a wreck, sources of ignition are just everywhere. I think the common assumption is that the spark comes from, the metal crunching, the friction.
That is certainly a factor. Steel scraping on asphalt can throw sparks around 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is well above the ignition point of gasoline vapor.
But that's not the main culprit.
No, the source material points to a more insidious trigger, the vehicle's own nervous system.
The electrical system.
The modern car is essentially a rolling computer. You have wiring harnesses running through the doors, under the floorboards, all through the engine bay. In a severe impact, one that really compromises the structural integrity, those wires get pinched or severed.
And unlike the old days where you might just blow a fuse, these systems can carry some pretty significant amperage. So if a hot wire shorts against the chassis, which is grounded, you get a continuous arc.
You have a welder, basically, an electrical arc happening inside a cloud of atomized fuel vapor. That's the recipe.
Wow.
But it gets even more complex because we aren't just dealing with gasoline anymore.
Right.
The research highlighted how different fluids in the car have different auto-ignition temperatures.
Right. This fascinated me. We all worry about gas, but what about something like brake fluid or oil?
Brake fluid is nasty stuff in a fire. It actually has a lower auto-ignition point than you might expect, and when it hits a hot surface like an exhaust manifold that's been bent upward into the engine bay...
It can ignite without a spark?
Exactly. It just needs that heat.
So you could have a crash, the front end crumples, the hot exhaust manifold gets shoved into the brake master cylinder, the fluid leaks, hits that hot metal, and boom, it ignites. And then that fire spreads to the fuel lines.
That is a very, very common failure cascade. And remember, newer cars use a ton of plastic in the engine bay. Intake manifolds, reservoirs, covers.
Right.
Once that initial fluid fire starts, the plastics begin to melt and drip, adding even more fuel to the fire before the gasoline is even seriously involved.
It's just a chain reaction. And this brings us to the topic that I know a lot of our listeners are curious about because it totally dominates the headlines. Electric vehicles. The mechanics of an EV explosion or fire are, they're fundamentally different from an internal combustion engine, aren't they?
Fundamentally different, yes. With gasoline, you need oxygen from the air to sustain the fire. If you smother it, it goes out. With a lithium-ion battery pack, the chemistry is self-sustaining. We're talking about a process called thermal runaway.
Okay, let's break that down. Thermal runaway isn't just burning, it's something else.
It's a chemical decomposition.
Yeah.
When a battery cell is crushed or pierced in an accident, the separator between the anode and cathode fails. This creates an internal short circuit. That short generates a ton of heat.
Okay.
If that heat gets high enough, the materials inside the battery begin to decompose. And here is the kicker. That decomposition releases its own oxygen.
So the battery is literally supplying its own oxygen to the fire.
Correct. You cannot smother it. You can dump foam on it, you can bury it in sand, but inside that casing, the chemical reaction is still raging. And as one cell heats up and fails, it transfers that heat to the cell next to it, which then fails.
That's a domino effect.
A domino effect that releases just massive amounts of energy.
And the visual is different too, right? The source material describes it less like a lazy yellow fire and more like a jet engine.
It's a pressure release. These batteries are sealed. When the gases build up inside, they vent with incredible force. You get these jet-like flames that can shoot out sideways from under the car. Yeah. And the smoke, this is crucial for anyone listening. The smoke from a battery fire contains hydrogen fluoride and other highly toxic gases. It's not just a choking hazard, it's a chemical burn hazard for your lungs.
There was also this issue of stranded energy that the report mentioned, this idea that the fire is out, but it's not really out.
This is a complete nightmare for first responders. You could put out the visible flames, but the chemical reaction might have just stalled halfway through. The battery still has all this trapped energy. There are documented cases where an EV crashed, caught fire, was extinguished, towed to a lot,
And
then reignited spontaneously 24 hours later.
that is just wild. So if you're in an EV crash, you can't assume that because the smoke stopped, the danger is over.
Never assume that. The thermal mass of that battery is huge. It holds onto that heat for a long, long time.
Okay, we've covered gas and electric, but we should probably touch on the outliers, the alternative fuels. I feel like I see more CNG, compressed natural gas stickers on trucks and buses these days.
You do. And while you, the listener, might not be driving a natural gas delivery truck, you might be driving next to one. And if you are involved in a collision with a CNG vehicle, the risk profile changes again.
Because now we're dealing with high-pressure storage.
Extreme pressure. We're talking thousands of PSI. Now, the tanks are incredibly robust. They're Kevlar wrapped. They get tested with gunfire, dropped from heights. They are really tough.
But
in a catastrophic failure or a prolonged fire that weakens the tank structure, you risk something called a BLEV.
BLEV.
Right. It stands for Boiling Liquid Expanding Vapor Explosion.
That sounds bad.
It's a physics term for when a vessel containing a pressurized liquid ruptures. The liquid instantly flashes to gas and expands its volume by hundreds of times in a fraction of a second. The shock wave from a pressure vessel failure is significantly more percussive than a gasoline fire.
So situational awareness matters here. If you crash into a bus or a delivery van, take a quick look at the badging. If it says CNG or LNG, that should probably accelerate your decision to get away.
Absolutely. And speaking of what's in the vehicle, we have to address the cargo factor, the improperly stored explosives point in our research.
Yeah, this one feels so preventable. It's not about the car's design, it's about the driver. We're talking about the spare gas can for the lawnmower or the propane tank for the barbecue grill.
Or even just aerosol cans on a hot day. But the gas can is the classic example. People put a plastic, 2-gallon jerry can in the trunk. If it's not secured, you get rear-ended.
That can is the first thing to be crushed.
The very first thing. Now you have 2 gallons of fuel released inside the cabin or the trunk space, instantly mixing with the air.
And because it's inside that enclosed volume, the vapor concentration hits that explosive ratio almost instantly.
And you are right there, in the middle of it. It turns a survivable rear-end collision into a fatal fire event in just seconds. If you have to transport fuel, it needs to be secured so it doesn't become a projectile or a burst balloon.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty terrifying picture of the mechanics, vapor clouds, thermal runaway, pressure vessels. The physics are really against us once the system fails. So this brings us to the mission part of today's deep dive. The crash has happened. You are alive. You are conscious. What do?
You leave. Immediately.
But it's not just get out. The source material is so specific about the distance. We need to talk about the 100-foot rule.
This is probably the most actionable takeaway from the entire stack of research we looked at. If you suspect a fire, or if the crash was severe enough to compromise the fuel or battery systems, you need to put a minimum of 100 feet between you and that vehicle.
Let's visualize 100 feet for a second. That's roughly the length of 3 school buses parked end to end, or about a third of a football field.
It feels like a long walk, and that's why people don't do it. There's this psychological phenomenon where people want to stay near the vehicle. It's their property, their possessions. They get out, they stand 10 feet away, and they start looking at the bumper. They pull out their phone to call insurance.
Or to film it. We have all seen the videos of people standing way, way too close to a burning car.
And that is a potentially fatal error. The reason for the 100-foot rule isn't just about the flames. It's about the blast wave and the shrapnel. If a tire explodes, which happens all the time in car fires, or if a shock absorber piston shoots out, or if a battery pack vents,
That debris is flying.
it's traveling at hundreds of miles per hour. A tire explosion alone can kill you if you're standing 10 feet away. The pressure wave can rupture eardrums and cause internal trauma.
Right.
The intensity of a blast follows the inverse square law. That just means if you double your distance, you reduce the intensity of the impact by a factor of 4. Distance is your only shield. Standing 30 feet away is not safe. 100 feet is the safety buffer, where the probability of being hit by debris or overcome by radiant heat just drops significantly.
And upwind is the other part of that, right? Especially with the toxic smoke from EVs we were just talking about.
Always upwind. You do not want to be inhaling burning lithium salts or burning plastics.
There's a psychological hurdle here too, though. In the moment you are dazed, you might be hurt. The idea of sprinting 100 feet seems daunting. But the research emphasizes this golden window of evacuation.
You have very little time. Fire spreads exponentially, not linearly. It can double in size every single minute. If you smell raw fuel, you might have seconds before ignition. If you see smoke from a battery, you don't know if that's the start of a slow burn or the precursor to a rapid vent. You have to override that freeze response and force yourself to move.
It's the ODE loop, observe, orient, decide, act. You have to cycle through that immediately, observe the smoke, orient yourself to 100 feet away, decide to leave the phone and the laptop behind, and act.
And leave the possessions. That's a hard one for people. Do not go back for the laptop. Do not try to pop the trunk to get your gym bag. If the environment is compromised, nothing in that car is worth the risk of a flashover.
Okay, let's talk about prevention for a moment, because obviously the best survival tactic is to not have the explosion in the first place. We can't always prevent the crash, but can we prevent the aftermath?
To a degree, yes. Maintenance plays a huge role here. A lot of car fires start because of pre-existing conditions that were just exacerbated by the crash.
You mean like frayed wiring or old, brittle fuel lines?
Exactly. If your car kind of smells like gas every morning when you start it, that's a micro leak. In a crash, that micro leak becomes a macro leak. If your battery tie-down is rusted through and the battery is wobbling around, a minor fender bender could slam the positive terminal against the hood, creating that short circuit we talked about.
So basic maintenance isn't just about keeping the car running. It's about keeping the car safe during a failure.
It's about reducing the variables. You can't control the other driver, but you can control the condition of your own fuel lines and your battery mounts.
There is one last layer to this which I think is important to land on. We've talked a lot about the terrifying physics, the 40 psi fuel spray, the 2,500-degree sparks, but we should probably contextualize the risks so people aren't terrified to drive to work tomorrow.
That's fair, and it's important. Statistically, the vast majority of car accidents, fender benders, low-speed collisions, do not end in fire or explosion. Modern engineering is actually incredible.
How so?
Well, fuel tanks are placed in protected zones ahead of the rear axle. Fuel pumps have inertia switches that cut power the moment an impact is detected.
So the car is actively fighting for you.
It is. The systems are designed to fail safely. But systems have limits. High-speed impacts, weird angles, or neglected maintenance can bypass those safety features. And that's why we prepare for the worst-case scenario. We don't prepare for the 99% of crashes that are fine. We prepare for the 1% that aren't.
That makes perfect sense. It's better to have the plan and not need it.
Knowledge weighs nothing. You carry it with you.
So let's recap the main takeaways from this deep dive. Number 1, the crash is just the beginning. The mechanical aftermath involves complex chemistry, vapor pressure, auto-ignition, and thermal runaways in batteries.
Number 2, the danger zone is invisible. It's the vapor cloud you can't see, or the toxic gas you're inhaling, or even just the radiant heat that can cook off nearby materials.
And number 3, the 100-foot rule. It is non-negotiable. If you even suspect a fire, get 3 school buses worth of distance between you and the car and go upwind.
And don't stop to film it.
Please don't. And finally, check your car. Fix the leak, secure the battery, and don't drive around with loose gas cans in the trunk.
Simple, actionable steps.
I want to leave the listeners with a challenge. You mentioned something earlier that stuck with me about mental rehearsal.
Yes. We spend hundreds of hours learning how to drive, hands at 10 and 2, checking your mirrors. We practice collision avoidance, but almost no one practices post-collision evacuation.
It's so true. I've never once sat in my driveway and thought, okay, boom, I'm hit. How do I get out?
You should try it.
Yeah.
Next time you park, just take 10 seconds. Visualize it. The airbag has deployed, the door is jammed, the buckle is tight. What is your move? Which window do you break? How do you get the kids out? Where do you run?
You build the neural pathway.
If you build that neural pathway now, in the safety of your driveway, your brain will be able to access it when you are upside down and smoke is filling the cabin. That mental rehearsal is the software update your brain needs.
That is a powerful thought. The first 60 seconds are yours to control, but only if you know what to do with them. Thanks for diving deep with us today. Check your tire pressure, check your fluids, and give yourself that 100 feet. We'll see you on the next one.
Please like, subscribe, and get notified.